as per usual, my thoughts on these two episodes are known by people who have watched the shorter reviews, and I don't think too much has changed as far as my output. And also, Lucy has given her own sort of lengthy, unscripted thoughts in her own video. So I don't know if either Boris or Rob wants to start giving their thoughts on Can You Hear Me to start us out.
Yeah, so last week's I think I had more, not negative, but I just would say it was an all over the place episode, probably. This week's I would say, a lot more positive thoughts on. I really enjoyed this week's one, actually. I think I mentioned that in the group, but I think it was maybe the best one of the season for me.
Predictably, I'm probably going to be the most positive about it, no question. So, yeah.
And I'll probably be the most negative, even though I'm not going to go on rant or anything like I did the other day. I was also very tired and cranky from that video, as you guys probably could tell.
See, I don't know. Boris, you want to give your thoughts on Can You Hear Me?
Well, basically, like, I feel like the episode had some good stuff going for it, but it didn't quite get there. It was like, we were on the verge of greatness. We were this close. This either needed to be like a two-parter, or they need to really condense down a lot of stuff. And I really feel like this episode has really solidified for me, like, one of the big problems with, like, Chibnall, or, like, his era, or, like, because not even like all the episodes he's written, even just some of the ones in his era, one of the big problems is that he puts, like, way too much stuff in the episodes. And what ends up happening is that, like, not everything gets developed as well as it should. Need to do is either make it a two-parter, like, spread some stuff out, or if you have to do a single episode, you need to, like, you can, like, get rid of some stuff and then, like, really develop the ideas you have. I kind of have this issue with it takes you away at a certain point where it's like you could have cut all that stuff out with, like, ribbons and, like, the interdimension stuff, and, like, you could have really fleshed out the Froggy Man thing and the grief and stuff, and, like, you could have had, like, a more solid story with that. Like, with this episode, like, you had, like, so much material, and there was a lot of interesting stuff. Like, the ending just got, like, sacrificed, and it was real messy. And, like, there was enough stuff for a two-parter. Like, you could have had, like, the escalation where you get the god, and then, like, oh no, there's another god, and like, we could have really delved into the whole anxieties and the nightmares and stuff with the companions and stuff and the doctor. It felt very shallow and surface level, unfortunately.
Honestly, they could have had, like, the Buffy dream episode where they really go into a lot of depth, and it could have been really cool what they could have done with the companions. What I would have done was take the god stuff and take the anxiety stuff and the dream thing, just make another enemy, and just have it in two parts, because the god stuff could be cool, but as it now, it's just, like, super cheesy. It's
I like how super cheesy it is, though.
It could work if it just has a whole episode dedicated to it, like all these things they feed off of human suffering and stuff like that. But it's just like Boris says, it's just a little bit, and then it feels a bit empty because there's just too much.
I also just want to say, like, the main guy was giving a pretty cool performance, so I enjoyed his presence just on that level alone. With the other one, like, there wasn't as much going on, but, like, maybe it would have been, she could have been more cool if she had more time or something, because, like, I like the idea of them, like, the doctor, like, being tricked to kind of, like, unleash this thing. She's being manipulated to do this, and, like, there's potential there, but, like, it doesn't quite land as well as it should, unfortunately.
Yeah, I actually really like your suggestion about making it a two-parter, because often people will suggest, like, oh, this episode had too much stuff in it, it should have been a two-parter, and I'm like, okay, episodes being chock full of ideas doesn't necessarily demand, like, a two-part story, but you're right, there's a great, like, episode-ending cliffhanger built in there, where it's like she lets out the other guy, and it's like, psych, fooled you, credits.
Fooled you!
And it's like, oh no, now we've got bigger stakes going into the next episode, and that would be really interesting. I don't know, I've sort of come to terms with the fact that the episode, like, marketed itself as being about the companions' insecurities, and I still think it is, because, like, I don't totally agree with you that this is like Praxeus or like a lot of other episodes where it's like they don't have enough time to give everything the focus that it needs. I think if any part of it does suffer, it's the god stuff. And, like, I know that that's the part of the episode that really doesn't, like, work for Lucy. But, like, I don't know. I really like how kind of classic era weird nonsense they are. I don't know. It feels very much like something that we would do in, like, a McCoy era episode. But it's just like, here's this eldritch weird being, the true nature of which we cannot possibly fathom, and we're just gonna like have them in this episode. It's gonna be real odd. And, like, if I were to make this a two-parter, it would be for the purpose of fleshing out that more, because I don't agree that like the companions' insecurities and their anxieties, and like I feel like that is given maybe not as much time as it could be to be something like truly great, but I really like what's done with it. And like I don't know, I'm in this place with this episode where, like Praxius, the way I would describe it is you give it a bit more breathing room and it would be like truly great. Like, this premise could be an all-timer if it's given that much more time. But the way it is now, I don't think it's like subpar or anything. I think it's a perfectly fine, pretty good, almost better than average episode.
Well, the way I would kind of compare it's like if you tried to make like the Human Nature, Family Blood, or the Science in the Library, Force of the Dead 2 parts. Like, just imagine if those were like both single part episodes. Like, you couldn't really envision that. It's just like, because they're just.
I can actually. You say that, but I can envision that, and I feel like it would be just. I would react to that the same way I react to this episode. Were those 2-parters? Because they have that time, they're like all-time greats that I can go back to over and over again whenever, and like they never get old. This one, I don't quite have that. It's not something I'll never rewatch, but I think it's good. I think it's a good, solid episode of TV.
Well, that's why I'm suggesting you should make it a 2-part just to like get more out of it, because like you could definitely like delve more into stuff with the companions and junk. Like there's good stuff. It's just you need to do more.
Aside from Zelen and the other one, who I don't think ever gets a name, maybe, but aside from the two of them, and like really, it's just the climax, because like you said, I like the sheer like scenery chewing of the performance. I like the premise of the.
Lord.
I like the fingers thing. I know Lucy doesn't like the fingers thing, but I like that. It's just such a weird thing. It's just such a for no reason, why not do it kind of thing.
He's
and I really like that.
it in the ear. That looks funny.
It's so weird. It's kind of creepy.
Sexual. It's like he's getting molested in the ear.
Gross,
Oh, no.
but true. And I like the animated sequence. Really, it's just the climax where it's like, oh, I did this and I did this and I did this, and now you're back in the cage. Like, wow, that was very rushed. No, I'm sorry. I feel like fix that scene in this episode on the whole is a lot better.
It also just kind of begs questions of like, why then just trap both gods at the same time if they apparently could do that?
Well, they say Zelen ran away, so I guess he knew it was coming and decided to split.
Also, the doctor has a magic wand.
Yeah, also, way too much Sonic use in this episode. It's obnoxious how the Sonic gets used in this episode. It's really
Power of 3.
I think the overuse of the Sonic has been a common issue since Chibnall took over, like more so than any other era.
more in his era than it has in others. Although, you know, the 11th used his screwdriver a lot. But like with this episode,
In Series 7, he did, yeah.
And ironically, Chibnall had 2 episodes in that season. So, Coinkydink? I don't know.
Probably. One of them ended with the Sonic just
Yeah, the
saving
Power of 3.
everything.
That's what I'm getting at. He just like soniced it and boom, it's a rushed ending.
it's so weird how all over the place it is here.
Get it out of my pocket while I'm in a dream state. And yeah, that's the other thing. Like, if you'd expand the time, we could have actually done more stuff with the Doctor instead of doing more arc teasing. We could have like explored her character more.
I also disagree with that because I have things to say about her and how I think this episode ties in nicely with the next episode as far as her character goes. I feel like if anyone could have gotten a little bit more to do or a little bit more exploration, it's actually Ryan, where, again, I like what's there. I like what's there a lot, actually, but his presence in the episode is mainly in service of his friend, and I like what's done there with Thibaut. But his actual dream sequence of where it's like, you were gone and now the earth is on fire and the dregs are here.
Yeah, I'm your Orphan 55.
There is a lot to read into with that dream sequence, and I'm like, oh man, I hope like we're going into what I assume is like an Earth apocalypse scenario with the 2-parter. And I hope we do something with that because that's really interesting. So we've had before companions who are like, I don't know if I like being away from home this long, or I don't know if like being outside of my like Earth social circle is going to change me. It's really interesting to conflate that with what if I literally miss the end of the planet because I know that that's a thing that's going to happen? What if I'm just not there when it happens?
Or they just put it in there because they thought those monsters were going to be more popular than they were, like the farting aliens.
No, I don't even give a hint
Not
of
head
credence.
on that.
Well, the thing is, like, the monsters in Order 55 aren't the worst thing about it. It's just that they're just in a really bad episode.
They're the least bad thing in that one.
It's the monsters in Graham. That's it.
You know what they look like? They look like those monsters from like the Doom games.
You know what? Not incorrect. But like I don't know, I'm giving them a bit more credit than that. I think they chose the dregs to pop in because it's like they literally represent where the human race is going, and Ryan is afraid that while he's gone, either literally that's going to happen, or his world as he knows it is going to change beyond him being able to recognize it when he gets back.
Oh, well, speaking of Ryan, because like Lucy brought this up in her video, like it feels like out of all the three companions, like his anxieties would probably be the most interesting to explore as far as like these things go, because like he has like a lot of issues and stuff. Again, if you had 2 parts, you could have maybe delved into more stuff.
Yep.
That's my beat. It should have been 2 parts.
Right thing about that whole thing is, yeah, they give him anxieties about his friend and maybe the world ending and stuff, which I take that with a grain of salt. But he has so many anxieties already; they didn't have to make a new one up.
I don't disagree with that. This would have been the perfect place to bring his dad back for cameo.
You brought Grace back. You might as well get the dad.
Oh yeah, like what happened to his dad? I assumed he would be a regular character after Resolution, but he's kind of disappeared.
His dyspraxia has consistently popped up in small places.
It kind of comes and goes.
Yeah, it's not very consistent.
I don't know if either of you saw it, but like Lucy and I have been part of a discussion on Twitter with like people who actually have dyspraxia, and they're like, it's good that it's not getting shoved in all over the place. It's like, just because you have dyspraxia doesn't mean that everything is a difficulty for you. And like having it pop up in small ways every couple episodes, I think is really all that's needed as a reminder that it's still there and that it's like a regular thing that he struggles with. Like in the next episode, we have that whole bit with the piano. At first, it plays like a joke because it's like, oh man, he cannot play piano at all. But no, it's like, this is something that he has to practice, and he keeps doing it, and eventually he gets the hang of it.
I just kind of assumed he sucked at it, but like maybe I just wasn't thinking hard enough.
Well, I mean, they talked about how Grace was like signed him up for practice, and he's like, like the bike riding, it was something that he just could not do, but she kept encouraging him.
Go on trying until it's done. Well, it's on.
Praxia is still there. With Graham, it's obvious what you give him as far as anxiety goes. Like he has a literal thing that could kill him that he's worried might come back, and we mentioned that in the first episode. With Yaz, you do kind of have to invent something, and we'll talk about that. And with Ryan, it's like there's too many to choose from on what might be anxieties for him. And so like
anxiety.
Yeah, and like I'm imagining if this were like a 2-parter and like we had a whole extended sequence, like you could have a part of it be about his dad, you could have a part of it be about Grace, you could have a part of it be about like what they choose to make it about, like the world ending. You could have part of it be like he's worried that his dyspraxia might act up at like a pivotal moment and he ruins something and like everything is terrible.
That could be interesting, actually.
Yeah. Like, again, I'm not disagreeing with you, Boris. I like the episode that we have, but if this were a 2-parter, I think it would be a fan favorite.
Every time you say his kid, I'm just going to stick my tongue out.
Don't do that. But yeah, do we want to just go straight to talking about Yaz then?
Yeah.
That's probably got the most to unpack out of all of them.
The stuff with Yaz would have been more interesting if it didn't feel just completely thrown into the final few minutes. Like, on paper, it's good, but it felt really underdeveloped to me. Like, oh yeah, Yaz was bullied, then she becomes a police officer because a police officer helped her. And that's just kind of, again, I think it's another case of the episode being disjointed, that it seems like they just threw it into the final few minutes.
The problem with it is, like, also, we all know, like, Yaz did not have any problems until this very episode, and it probably...
Yeah, it's never been hinted at, is what it is.
Response to that is twofold. One, I actually like that it's not something that's been hinted at before now. And like I mentioned that in the video, it's just, it's like on a similar note to the dyspraxia thing. I like that just because in this character's past, it's not something that has to define them.
I
And
don't want to define her. I just want there to be at least like there's something, just some little thing every once in a while that says there's something up or something was up.
but if
And
she's moved past it, then how do you do that?
I know, but I don't know how
Especially since Ryan's thing is a physical affliction. Her thing is just like a really dark period of her life that is in her past. You can't exactly handle those two things the same.
Maybe I'm wrong, actually, but you know, in the Witchfinders last season, I think she did mention she had depression.
I recall that she mentioned the bully that she used to deal with by name in the Witchfinders.
Yeah, she dealt
So
with
we know
Right,
that
so they did actually hint at it one time in the past, so I'll give them a bit of credit for that.
I wouldn't say that so much like depression or
what do we think about this? Because this seemed obvious to me, and I didn't like really think about how much it's really up for interpretation. Do we think she's genuinely suicidal in that scene? Because I think yes.
I didn't really get that impression, though. Like, there might have been a hint of it, just because like it felt like some of that might be the case, but, like something that you could read into or like not. Like, it's there if you want to view it that way, but I don't think it necessarily has to be.
Yeah, like that was my first assumption about it. And watching the scene like multiple times in a vacuum, I do think the dialogue is very carefully chosen. You could read that into it, or maybe they just like pulled it back for the sake of, this is a family show. We don't want to be too explicit about that. They might be doing multiple things there. I definitely took it to be, if not that she's like suicidal by nature, that she was like in a really dark place at the time. I don't know. And because the thing that clinches it for me is in the dream sequence where like her dream sister says, "Do it right this time." Like, what does that mean if not something very final? I think. I don't know.
I think they leave it vague on purpose so anybody can kind of imprint themselves in this, because it could be depression, she could be running away, she could be dealing with the bullying problem, or she could wanting to jump off a bridge.
Or all of the above.
On the family show thing, the recent episode had the Cyberman saying he slit his kid's throat, so maybe that's a bit of a. It's funny they covered that up, but not the other one.
That neck. Snap that neck real good.
True.
I think it's one of those situations where they're like, horrible violence against children, that's fine, but hinting to suicide, no, that's a bit far.
Well, I
because when people lost their crap about the
18
Don't
plus.
For Mamie thing, and that was like death related. So like I don't know. Like I guess it can vary on the situation.
Well, yeah, I don't know, because speaking of that episode, actually, I think it might be one of those things where, that is very visceral, but at the same time, it's a Cyberman, it's a fakey made-up science fiction bad guy, and like we'll really push the limit sometimes in this show with the things that we'll have like the monster alien villains do, where this is like just a person, it's just a teenage girl at that time sitting down with a police officer having a very serious, grounded discussion. This is like a thing that could be reality, and they want to tread carefully. And it reminds me of like the way that we killed Danny Pink off, where it's like the reason that hit so much, even if you're not someone who cares about that character, the fact that he's just a guy who got hit by a car on the way to work is like, oh, for this show, that's like real. And this scene carries that same sort of thing for me. So I feel like they want to be more careful about it here.
Yeah, not so cartoony violence. And you're right about that scene. That hit hard. This, I do think, if there was just more, that's my problem. Like, my whole problem is there needs to be more. I want more.
The thing is here, and like Rob mentioned, he felt like it was tacked on in the last few minutes. I disagree with that mainly because of the scenes that we spend with her and her sister.
It's not tacked on, because like you said, there is scenes at the very beginning and stuff, so it's not like out of nowhere, but my problem is there's still just not enough focus. It's like, okay, we mentioned at the beginning, and then we have the meat of it at the end, and this is just me speaking personally, because I just think if I was to make this, I would actually split it into two, like I said, have a whole episode really exploring the gods, because I think that's just an epic thing that could be so cool, and just have like this, like some kind of monster villain that likes to give people nightmares and really get into that. You never saw the episode, I don't think, Nick, but there's a Buffy episode, I won't spoil it, where it's basically they go into the psyches of each and every character, and there's like this demon slayer that's torturing them, and it's so good. And I'm like, if you could get something like that into this show, I think it could have been one of the best episodes they made so far. But as now, it just feels very empty to me.
Yeah, that's
My
fine.
opinion. Yeah.
About the Graham thing, like that was pretty controversial.
Oh, yeah, the thing at the end. Oh no, I like that a lot.
I did too, actually. I thought that was actually quite good. I don't really understand what the complete backlash was on the internet. Like, oh, she's disregarding his feelings. Even though they made it actually pretty clear in the scene, it's because she's socially awkward, which I think is actually a character trait of Jodie Whittaker's Doctor. So I was a bit confused at the backlash of that one.
The backlash, I think, is because so much of her social awkwardness has been played for comedy, they took that as this scene playing that moment for comedy.
I didn't really get that. It was kind of funny in a way, but I didn't feel like they were deliberately trying to take a serious situation and play it for laughs. I think it was actually quite a relatable thing for people who have like that type of social anxiety, that they don't know how to respond to serious situations like that. So I quite like that scene.
Yeah, it was literally the only scene I liked in the whole episode. I was like, oh, that was cute.
You mentioned that. And like, I remember what I was going to say about the Yaz stuff just briefly is what I like about it is her sister. Like, I come out of this episode liking Sonia a bit more.
Yeah, the sister stuff was decent.
Yeah,
Yes.
she's been relatively one note in the brief bits that we've seen of her prior to this point. But like, I don't know, this paints a much more human picture of her, and I like that.
I'll agree with that, yeah.
Do any of you guys want to hear one of my theories why people might have a problem with the Graham scene? It involves sexism.
Don't just leave us hanging on it. So yeah.
Just go ahead. My cat cannot decide if it wants to come into my room or not. Just go ahead.
It's worried what she's gonna say, so that's probably why.
Okay, we are okay with like the male doctors being kind of cold and everything, but we kind of look at the female doctor. We want her to be like a mother in that situation, maybe. Also, everybody's super critical of her because she is a female doctor and they're looking for anything, because, okay, if 12 would have done that, everybody would have been like, that's just 12's character, but
yeah, I think that too.
Because it's 13 and we just want to find something wrong with her, that's why they are so critical of this scene.
It's actually really interesting. Even when they are being kind of cold and distant, a lot of people look to the Doctor as kind of like a paternal figure for the companion. Even putting aside just sort of like people may or may not carry this bias toward female characters in general who are like in authoritative positions. It's interesting that at no point throughout this whole show has 13 ever felt like a maternal figure. And some people might be expecting that from her.
It might be, like I said, just people picking her apart, or they might be like wanting something from her because they see female doctor. So
I'm sure people have that. I don't think anyone has that consciously. I think a lot of people in the back of their minds maybe alter to that expectation.
Yeah. Well, especially because a lot of female characters are kind of made to just kind of baby the male characters a lot of times. So.
Yeah, they tend to be a bit more emotionally open as well, which I think might be a reason why people would not expect it potentially.
Because I was kind of miffed at 12 during the Kill the Moon stuff because I felt like that was kind of callous of him, and so, like I don't think it's necessarily a strictly like male female thing. As far as like the scene itself goes, like I didn't necessarily have like the outrage towards it at the time. But like going over some other people's views on it and stuff, I'm like, I feel like the execution could have been a little bit better. And like, also there's the question of like, can like the Doctor not take Graham to get his cancer cured at some point? I feel like we kind of want like a scene with like maybe offering a little support just because like maybe the episode needed it just a little bit. Like even if she was like, I'm not entirely sure what to say, but, like, I'm here for you anyway, just making that clear.
Well, that is what she says.
She's like a very roundabout way.
That brings it to Mr. TARDIS's problem with the scene, which is that he feels like the dialogue is, like, too cloaked in his words. And it's like, you say that, Lucy, and yet he shares kind of the issue that Boris is speaking to right now.
I don't care what if we agree on something or not. I still just feel like the gag reflex comes out.
Well, like what he had to say about the scene is that he wished that the dialogue would just come out and say what it's saying rather than have it be like a layer of subtext. What the Doctor says is, I'm still really socially awkward, so I'm just going to walk over here, pretend to look at something, and in a moment I'll think of something that I should have said that will have been helpful. What she means when she says that is, I listened to you, I heard you, give me a minute to think, and I will have something for you. His point is that, like, his criticism is like, she should have just said those words rather than cloaking it with saying what I'm about to do angle to it. I don't agree with that criticism, but I think that's kind of what Boris is getting at. It's a little bit hard to tell exactly what her intent in that scene is, because she's not just saying it. She's kind of like covering it up with this, here's what I'm gonna do, and in a minute I'll get back to you.
Like, I also think part of it is also that, like, right after this scene, we have like the doctor going off on her whole Mary Shelley thing. So like it does seem a little like, oh, I'm gonna do this now. Like, I would have liked it if, like, maybe if she maybe offered Graham like a suggestion or something, like, of where to go. Like, maybe that could have been a good segue or something. But I don't know.
That would have been great, and it would have made what I think is happening, even if the writers don't necessarily intend it, more explicit. Like, and this is throughout this series and last series, I think she's just constantly trying to distract them all the time, including herself. Her response is, oh man, you've got a lot going on. Let's just go on another fun trip, because that is my default answer to everything.
That happened at the end of Fugitive of the Judoon too, when they're trying to ask her questions about.
About the Gallifrey thing. Yeah,
asking her
at the beginning
about
of the
it was
episode,
something.
and then like it's the master, and I'm gonna be all cranky about it.
And then she says, "Oh look, there's this problem on Earth. Let's go and look at that."
Well,
Which
I'm gonna
leads on to
shoehorn in the Jadoon line, and we'll have a fun time.
If what I think we're doing with this character is intentionally what they're doing, then I think this is all like fascinating. She just cannot process her feelings or their feelings properly, and she's constantly got to be doing things like all the time, and that ties in like what I think her deal in this episode is, which is like they all leave to go do their own thing, and like it's just like the last time they were all there with arachnids in the UK, where in that episode they think they're going off forever, and she's like, well, I'll be fine. I'm going to go off. And she's doing a really bad job of pretending that she's going to be fine without them. In this episode, they all go off to do their own thing. Graham is like, are you going to be okay here by yourself? She's like, I'm going to be fine. And then we just spend like a minute with her, like, she has no idea what to do with herself. And like one of her first responses is just like, maybe I should just go to like lunchtime tomorrow so they'll be done. And then we can get back to what we're doing. Like, I think that's really funny, but also really sad. And I hope we keep doing stuff with that. Where like this doctor cannot be by herself, and she's also keeping them at arm's length. So it's this weird paradox where she can't let them in fully emotionally, but without them, she can't function almost. And like when she arrives in Aleppo, she's talking to nobody, like they're still there. And then like right after that, she goes to Tahir and she's like, visitors, singular. It's like she can't fully process in her mind whenever she's alone. She can't be alone, period. It's really interesting.
The doctor is not very good by themselves. I remember David Tennant did that for like for an episode when Rose was first.
I'm more victorious.
They did it with Matt Smith and Peter Capaldi a bit too. Matt Smith, after traveling alone for too long, goes crazy and kills Solomon. Yeah.
I don't know if they realized how dark that was going to be.
But they follow up on it slightly in the next episode.
Yeah, it's now called Mercy a little bit.
Yeah.
And if you think back to Listen, the Peter Capaldi episode, then I think he spends a lot of time on his own, and he starts coming up with crackpot theories about the monster under the bed when he's on his own. I think they went to the effort of pointing that out as well. So it's sort of a consistent character trait, I think.
But to the point of just like the episode feeling scattered in general, I disagree with. For as weird as the gods are, the episode is very, very focused on its anxiety theme. And like they are there even like to the degree that they could have been utilized better. They're there to bolster that idea. And I think with the Doctor, with all the other ones, it's like they're alone too long and they start to like lose track of their morality and like their sense of perspective is usually what we do. 13 is someone who by herself for just a moment, I think she has anxiety in a way that she's not comfortable talking about, which is just like she needs people around her and things to do constantly because being alone with herself, she just can't handle.
I think people do that where they have anxiety real bad, and it's like the opposite of like introverts. It's like I have to be around somebody, or my thoughts will start swimming around my head, and I'll start getting depressed and upset and stuff.
Yeah, this is why I find the paradox so fascinating, because this episode ends, like I mentioned in the other video, it ends everybody has a support system that works for their anxieties except her. Ryan, he's at least able to vent to Yaz, and they're able to like reach a conclusion of like, well, you know, things are fine for now. Yaz has her sister, and they do this like yearly, and they're clearly there for each other emotionally. Graham has his friends who he's at least able to talk to. He has the doctor who he's able to talk to. The fear is always there, and it's never going to go away, but at least I can acknowledge it and have it out in the open. And Tahira, she has her literal giant monster that she is able to control with her mind because she accepts that she owns it. So, like, everyone at the end of the episode owns their anxieties, and that brings them to a bit of a conclusion. The doctor just doesn't. Like, this is still a problem for her, and she hasn't even acknowledged it yet.
On that note, like, I would agree there's definitely some like potentially interesting stuff on the surface, and maybe part of the frustration is that like the payoff is it's a very slow burn and we're waiting for the payoff. Like, she still has got to say what's up with Gallifrey and stuff, and like I guess that's coming the finale, so like I guess there's that, but like it has been kind of frustrating just waiting around like, come on, let's get to it already. And we saw a little bit of it in the next episode where it's like, you know, there's this building kind of tension and like things might snap soon. So like it's gonna be interesting to see how the finale pays all this off, if it does. It is interesting because like we're still not sure entirely if all the companions are gonna be gone by the end of the season, or like what's going on there, or if they're all staying, or what's gonna happen. So it's gonna be interesting to see where all these dynamics end up.
I love the suspense. I hope it lasts.
Yeah, Willy Wonka.
I will point out I liked the animation scene. I thought that was really good.
The animated sequence was cool.
It was something different.
I thought it was really nicely. It kind of reminded me of, you know, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1. Where
someone brought that up.
Instead of just describing the events, they have like an illustration next to it, which helps sort of make it a bit more interesting when they're just spouting out exposition. Quite good.
Although speaking of animation, we did technically have the Infinite Quest and Dreamland, but that was more like a spin-off thing, so I guess it's not quite the same thing.
This is the first time on the main show they said we had a animated thing, and that's kind of cool.
I like that the Doctor has personalized ringtones for all three of the companions, and that Graham is the sound of a little clown honk.
Yeah, that was kind of
comic relief.
Oh, yeah, speaking of the Sonic thing, like someone made the point where it's like you don't need a Sonic to make a three-way call.
I know, that's so weird. It's so weird, the Sonic in this episode.
Revolutionary technology.
She used a lot for this whole era, but this episode is so weird about it.
Here's the thing, okay? I think that was just like someone being really out of touch with technology. Like, they don't understand. Like, you can have a three-way call. You don't need a magical device from the future.
Dr. Poop YouTube thing where there's like they keep putting in clips of various people on the phone in Doctor Who, so it actually would make sense if they had like put all those guys together in one call.
Oh boy, I can't wait to see what they do with that. But yes, I believe that's about all of interest that I wanted to touch on for this episode.
Final thoughts, briefly, everyone.
I didn't have much to say that you hadn't already said. I think it would be better if it was a two-parter, because there was some good stuff. I liked the concept was good. The villains were pretty enjoyable. The pacing was very weird, and that was like I think the main problem with it. It just doesn't sit right going from like sort of these sort of cartoonish villains and then suddenly switching to like this whole serious mental health thing in the last few minutes.
Well, you know, as I've been repeating ad nauseum, it probably should have been a two-parter, or at least like cut some stuff out. For the love of things, just you could have cut out the stuff with like what's her name in the past. I don't think that was entirely necessary. Like you could have just like focused in on the companion stuff, because that's
it feels like too many episodes this season. They're just going to all these lavish locations, and
like that's the other
don't really
thing.
Add anything to the story.
That's the other thing. Like if you cut stuff out, you could probably save money. Like, what are you doing?
Nathan Turner method. We need to go to Spain. We need to go to the Netherlands. We need to go to Peru. Come on.
Imagine that scene with that girl with one of the companions over, getting over one of their anxieties and using that to defeat the gods. Even would have been better.
We need to jet off to Syria for a quick holiday. Nah,
Well, I did say this
that's
feels
better.
like
Better.
a Sierra episode, so
Good ideas. Shallow, empty execution.
I wouldn't say shallow or empty, just disjointed. I thought it was an interesting episode, but very flawed. It was okay on the whole.